Yeah. All right, it is 5:30, so we'll officially begin. My name's Andy Frye. I'm here with Ambassadors Forum, kind of as their guest, but we've become associated and friends over the last few years. But the reason I know them is because I actually spend my summers traveling with an organization called Worldview Academy. We do apologetics and leadership and worldview camps for Christian teenagers, and sometimes non-Christian ones, which is always fun. Had a Muslim kid show up and spend a whole week with us at an apologetics camp. Wow. That was a fun week. So, but normally we're training kids in Christian worldview and apologetics all over the country. So, and through that, a few years ago, met the awesome people here at Ambassadors Forum. So they let me come hang out with them. And I'm filling in for Adrian. If you didn't catch that a minute ago, he's sick. So we're still going to look at the implications of a worldview without God, but more specifically on the topic of identity, which, as you can guess, is a huge issue. So this is my quick plug, and then we'll get into it. We do camps. We'll be at Concordia University in July and Seattle Pacific in July. So if you know a teenager that would be interested in that, worldview.org, the back end of my email. And my email is there because I have a lot of words on my slides, which violates all the TED Talk rules, and I talk fast. And so sometimes they'll go like, whoa. And I say, guess what? If you email me when this is all over, I will send you a PDF of the slideshow. You can have it, okay? And it'll pop up on the last slide as well. So if that gets away from you, I always say that the type A's are frustrated because they can't write everything down, and the type B's are happy because they go, cool, I don't have to take notes and just sit back. So everybody can be happy now. You can all get the slides. So, but I want to dive into this question of identity, and it is such an amazing apologetics question. An issue to talk about, because unless you've been under a rock for the last 10 years, you know that identity is a huge social issue. It's a huge political issue. It's a huge issue that the church is having to deal with, and our society is talking about ways that, 20 years ago, as everybody my age says, they couldn't even imagine. So identity is a massive issue. And no, I am not going to dive into the sexual identity issue tonight. That's a great topic. Talk about it all the time with kids. But I want to go deeper beneath that to the idea of what does it mean to be human? Because one of the things that I think is significant to understand apologetics is that apologetics is most effective when we're speaking to where people are at, where their needs are at. And so I grew up watching, I grew up in a church that was literally attached to ICR and all the fossil guys. Anybody know Henry Morris? Oh, yeah. Okay, Henry Morris IV and I graduated together from a Christian high school. We just called him Henry IV. So yeah, they weren't very original naming the generations in that family. It's a good name, so why change it? So we could talk fossils and we could do a lot of that science stuff, but the reality is that's probably not going to get you very far in a street conversation. Most people don't know, don't care. But identity, right? We're talking about identity now we're engaging, right? This is my 38th year in public education. I'm retiring this year, by the way, so I'm finally getting out of high school. That's good. And I'll have to figure out what I do when I grow up. So. But every day I'm around teenagers, and man, identity is huge, and just you're watching people trying to figure out who they are, unhappy with their identity. And so I'd say as Christians, when we talk about apologetics, it's not so much having all this arcane knowledge. I mean, that's cool. I love John Lennox, love Sean McDowell. Those guys are brilliant. They're also very relatable. But you and I are not likely to master fossil records or biblical archaeology, unless you're really in that, which is cool. And you're not likely to be in those conversations, right? So how do we do apologetics at a street level with everyday people? And what people are looking for is meaning, especially in a society that says there is no meaning. And I believe that we Christians have what somebody has called the better story, right? The Christian narrative gives wisdom for living a good life, because that's essentially what people want, right? I've never met anyone who said, no, I'd really like a terrible life. And at the core of that is, who am I, right? What does it mean to be human? Who am I? And that really affects the way I see who you are. Now, if you think about our society is kind of weird. We define ourselves in a lot of different ways. And you see this in the church, out of the church. We define ourselves in a lot of different ways. And it's kind of, if you sit back and think about it, it's kind of fun to observe. Like, we define it by relationships. Again, I work in a public high school. Okay, I'm watching, kids trying to define themselves by relationships all day long. Walking by kids in the hall saying, hey, there's more germs in the human mouth than a dog's butt. You really need to unlock your lips there. So, yeah.
I'm going to be in the broadcast studio next door. I'll close all my doors, but if it's too loud, if it's disturbing you, come let me know, and I'll do something to turn it down.
Cool. All right. Well, as it's not death metal, we'll be fine. Yeah. All right. So, I'm surrounded by this every day, watching people desperate for identity. But adults are the same way, right? I mean, we want to have meaning, significance, and we attach that to relationships. Also working in high school, there are things like parent conferences, where mommy comes in and says, well, Johnny's never got anything less than a B in his life. You took your class, Mr. Frye. I'm like, well, pressure's off now, right? Okay, Mom? Good, right? Well, who are we worried about here, Mom? Is it your identity as a mother that's being challenged here? Is that why you're here chewing on me? Because Johnny hasn't turned any homework, so... Right? I coach soccer, but I also refereed soccer for 13 years. You want to talk about adults putting their identity on the relationship with their children? Yeah. I haven't cussed out in 4 or 5 languages that I could tell. Right? But these dads losing their mind, screaming at me about an out-of-bounds call. I'm like, dude, it's 7-year-olds. Dude, chill out. Right? Is this really about the game? Right? So we put identity in relationships, in other people. If only that girl liked me, if only that guy liked me, if only my kid is successful, then I'll be somebody. That's an identity issue. We put it in our associations. There's a reason they call sports fans fans. It's short for fanatic. Right? Somebody once described football as, 50,000 people desperately in need of exercise watching 22 men desperately in need of rest. Right? Screaming and yelling. Do you know the number 1 day for spousal abuse in America is Super Bowl Sunday? Was it really about the game? Or did somebody tie their identity to a team? Yeah. And then mix in, alcohol or something else that makes people stupid. But is it really about the football? Right? So in our associations, we're church, we're just as bad, right? We're in a some of you walked in today, oh, it's a Presbyterian church. Oh, well, I suppose I can enter. Because my church is better. Right? I mean, your church is cool, but Jesus loves us a little bit more. Right? How many have seen that in the church, right? In our associations, right? Yeah, we all know. We know that happens. Right? We put identity in our associations, right? Who we're connected with. I teach government. That's fun. I was in my class. I say, on behalf of everybody over 40, I apologize for the behavior of grown-ups in your world. That's how I start my government class. Yeah, people are weird. People get crazy weird, right? About who they're connected with, what party, what group, what this, right? And not because of the validity of the ideas they're defending. It's more of a fanatical, irrational approach. What's on the line there? Identity, right? We want to belong to a tribe. But our identity, our associations. Some in our accomplishments. This one's fun because, America, we're a classless society. Really? No, we're not. No, we're not. I get to fly places sometimes to speak, and so that's always fun, right? How many have flown and sat down the plane? And you're about to get into that conversation with somebody you've never met before, right? Cheek to cheek with your new best friend. You know which cheeks I'm talking about. Unless you fly first class. I'm in ministry, it's economy. So you're doing the dance there with the seat belt, the person next to you, and try not to touch them too much. And inevitably, they turn and say, so, what do you do? Which is an identity question, right? See, I kind of want to mess with them. Yeah, of course. You've seen me 5 minutes. You know this already about me, right? Like you could just see how judgy they are and say, I'm a garbage collector. Oh, well, I'm sure that's meaningful work, right? Like, no, you're judging me, right? You're looking down on me, aren't you, right? Or I tell them what I do sometimes. I'm a history teacher. That's like being a Catholic priest. It's so strange, because I'm sitting next to this banker or something, and he's like, oh, history, I love history. I was never very good in school, all those names and dates, but I love it now. I'm like, are you confessing? Because you're like 40, and I don't really care what your middle school grade was. Okay, but it's okay. Watch 3 documentaries, and you're forgiven. So, strange thing, right? It's an identity thing, right? Or now, the fun thing is like somebody says, so what do you do? And say, I'm homeless. How did you get on the plane? My wife says I'm not allowed to do that, though, so. Right? But it's this identity thing. What do you do, right? And kids, right? High school kids, right? You know, the question they hate, and you've all done this to a high school kid. Well, what are you going to do when you... And they're like, I'm 16. I don't even know what I'm going to have for lunch. Right? But it's an identity thing. What's your identity going to be? Where are you going to invest your life? Right? Or adults, what have you invested in, right? And we do it with like our bank account or our college degree. Oh, I went to Oxford, I went to Harvard, I went to community college, right? And we like layer people in our heads with value because of that. Right? Strange thing, right? Even wearing our cars. I got a car, my wife lets me get a new truck every 20 years. So it was great. I got a new one, I used one. 2014 Nissan Frontier. It was in 2016, so it was only kind of used. I was feeling pretty good about myself. Yeah. 4-wheel drive. Pulled up a stoplight, and then here comes one of those new, at the time, 2016 Tacomas. Oh, I want one of those. I'm a nobody. I'm a loser. It's a car. Isn't it interesting what we tie our identity to? Sometimes our circumstances. What's happening to us, what's happened in the past to us. Maybe it was a good thing. Played adult soccer too. Boy, there's a lot of 35-year-olds trying to live out their high school senior year over and over and over again. I said, dude, chill out, you're 35. Like, we're all going to break something if you keep playing that hard. Just relax, we got to work in the morning. I was really good in high school. It's over, man. High school is over. Get a life. Sometimes it's a trauma. And sometimes people carry that their whole life. When they look in the mirror, they see that L on the forehead because of something that happened to them. That coach that said, you're being cut. The teacher said, you're never going to make it. You're never going to amount to anything. That becomes identity. So identity is in our heads. It's all around us. It's how we look at people. Jesus said that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's interesting because without sounding too therapeutic or anything, and not love yourself in the sense of I'm so awesome. But if you hate yourself, have you noticed that people that hate themselves are pretty awful to be around? Like people who are bitter about themselves, that bitterness tends to spill out onto everybody else. The way we see ourselves is going to affect the way we see and treat other people. Now we got to balance that out. Some of us, our problem is we love ourselves a little too much. But some of us are obsessed with ourselves in a negative way. And by the way, hating yourself is still thinking too much about yourself, isn't it? It's still a me thing. It's just the darker side of that coin. Paul says, think of yourself with sober judgment, balanced judgment. I am a sinner, but I'm saved by grace. I'm the image of God, but I'm merely human, right? That balanced place. And then I start seeing you and you and you and you the same way. And if I get that out of whack, I see people out of whack. And then I treat them out of whack. So, as I said, I think we Christians have the better story. Before I talk about that, I want to, by contrast, and as a way of thinking through the apologetics, look at what does a worldview without God say? Because in our culture, Armand Nikolai of Harvard, Christian psychiatrist, says it comes down to this. Either the universe has meaning because it's created, or it's an accident and there is no meaning. And since you and I are part of that universe, right, whatever way you go, that's going to begin attaching to you. If the universe has no meaning, and I'm a piece of that meaningless universe, then I have no meaning. Right? So we start thinking about identity. It starts connecting to these critical questions. And I always like to tell students at Worldview Academy and in my public high school class, when I start explaining what other people think, I always say, look, let me show you their words, at least a little bit, So, I'm not putting words in their mouth. So I'm going to throw some quotes up here. Don't write all the quotes down. You can look them up. You can get the slideshow. I put them there because I want you to see their words. But if there is no God, where does that lead us? One way it leads us is that we are merely objects. We are merely animals. Now, this isn't my saying this. Richard Dawkins, very famous apologist for atheism and evolution, loves to debate Christians. You've probably seen the debates if you know anything about apologetics. If not, look them up. They're pretty cool, especially when he debates John Lennox. And Richard Dawkins is British, so that right away makes him smarter than Americans, because if you have that accent, you know you're cool. Right? There's Oxford University. He says, there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It's every living object's only reason to exist, sole reason for being. I appreciate that. I love that he is that honest about the logical conclusion of an evolutionary worldview. He's absolutely right. If evolution is true, that is the no designer, no God, no creator. If that's true, he's right. Okay? Oliver Wendell Holmes, Supreme Court Justice, who, by the way, voted to sterilize women forcibly. Yes, that happened. Says there's no innate intrinsic differences among a human being, a baboon, or a grain of sand. Again, if we are evolved objects, he's right. We are just collection of atoms. You have no more value or significance than the chair you're sitting on, because it's also a collection of atoms. Yours just function or shape differently. But at the end of the day, it's just stuff. It's just matter. One more quote. I just, again, want to show you that, a lot of people say they believe in evolution. I go, I don't think you've thought it through. Because you show them these quotes, and they're like, oh, that's horrible. No, that's actually true, if your assumption that you began with is correct. William Provine, if you've read an evolutionary biology textbook in college, he was probably one of the consultants or authors. He's died now. Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. There's no gods, no purpose, no ultimate foundation, no ultimate meaning to life, and no free will for humans either. Right? Because you're an animal. So you can't make decisions. That gets interesting, right? Criminology. What right do you have to throw somebody in jail for something they didn't decide to do? It's just their instinct or the way they were socially programmed by their environment. Unless you think I'm just being dramatic. Charles Manson used to make that argument every time he came up for parole down at Pelican Bay, down near where I live. They didn't listen to him, fortunately. But that's the argument. He said, you taught me this. By what right do you keep me here? No free will for humans. If we have no free will, that gets really interesting. Because this is the idea of determinism. That everything we do is driven by something we cannot control. We are not actually making any decisions. Which, by the way, someone said this, and I remember thinking as a kid, evolution is a very complicated way to just get rid of responsibility for your behavior. Again, I teach school. Most of the teenagers, they'll happily do that without writing a book about it. Just go, I don't know, not my fault. Go to college, we have stacks of books. Comes down to this, I don't know, it's not my fault. I was just born that way. I just evolved that way. It was the instinct. I was deprived of Twinkies. I couldn't help myself, right? So, but that's the deal, right? Because if we are merely animals, we are operating according to natural laws, which we didn't create, we don't control, and we can't override. Or, if you want to take the other tack, we're programmed by our environment. Also, we didn't control that. I've been teaching long enough that about a third of the teachers in the school I teach at are my former students. That's depressing. So the child development teacher, it's always funny because I kind of get into this in my world history class and talking about Darwin, the implications of Darwin. And ladies, you can sit in the front. I don't spit that much. If you like, come on in. It's okay. Get comfy. She's like, no, he's weird. I'm not getting near him. Okay. Yes, bravery. I love it. Come on. So, I get into this, right? And they go, oh, Miss So-and-so over in child development says it's either nature or nurture. Have you heard that one? Yeah. So you're either doing it because you're programmed by nature or you're doing it because you're programmed by your environment. But there's no, maybe a kid decided to do something. Like, it's interesting how this view objectifies humans entirely and takes away any dignity or value by saying you have no choice. Right? You're just an organic robot. Again, Marvin Minsky, one of the founders of AI, apparently also was in Epstein's notebook I just read. That's weird. Said that everything, including that which happens in our brains, is a purely random set of accidents. See, I always kind of wonder, like, if some smart aleck student, and I was that guy, would say, so, Dr. Minsky, does that include all the books you've written? But I'm actually not kidding, because Charles Darwin admitted this. In 1881, he wrote a letter to his friend, and he realized he had unleashed an idea. He said, wait a minute. I've got this horrid doubt which always arises in my mind whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value at all or trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the conviction of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? See, strangely, intellectuals had thought themselves into an intellectual cul-de-sac. They literally talked themselves out of being able to actually think, because thinking implies choice, agency. G.K. Chesterton called this the suicide of thought. So Darwin's like, oops, I've created a theory by which can we really say we're thinking? But it has more implications. Because if I'm not thinking, what about love? I mean, is love merely a dopamine hit or a goosebump? Or is it a decision to seek another's good? When you say, I choose you to be my spouse. Not if you can't choose at all. How does that work, right? So it doesn't kill thought, it kills love. Again, don't take my words for it. I know don't be writing these quotes down. You'll go crazy. Some of you are already like, no, I can't do it. Jerry Coyne, again, one of those guys that likes to debate Christians, says this: our brains are simply meat computers. We are simply constructs of our brain. We're puppets performing scripted parts written by the laws of physics. Words and deeds of others are simply environmental influences that can affect our brain molecules. That's how, and these are his quotes, love begins. Are you depressed yet? You see, Christians, I think we have a better story. I think we have a story that points and gives solid intellectual ground to human dignity. To put it more bluntly, if you really understand this theory, you would never write words like, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That all implies dignity and choice, liberty itself. Now, that's kind of depressing. Now, don't get me wrong, I love science, right? I've got 2 rebuilt knees from playing adult soccer, which turns out to be a really bad idea when you're too old to play it. I love science, right? I love technology. I have great respect for scientists. To borrow from C.S. Lewis, I just want scientists to do good science, not to create some new weird religion. But I love science. In fact, one time I was really struggling with the whole love thing. My wife and I had been married for 10, 15 years. I can't remember how long. And I'm a guy, in case you didn't know. I'm a little romantically challenged, guys. Can I get an amen? Oh, sorry, Presbyterian Church. I don't know if we do that. So, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right? So, but yeah, I mean, guys, you have this struggle, like, what does she want? Now, I will say, my wife and I have been married 34 years this June, and we have come to that joyous point, gentlemen, be jealous of me, where she just sends me links to Amazon. I buy it. My daughter wraps it. I give it to my wife at Christmas. She pretends to be surprised. Everybody's happy. But this was earlier in our marriage. So it was early in our marriage, and I'd figured out flowers and chocolate. But apparently, like 14 years straight of flowers and chocolate, I believe women, you call that, a rut. I was in a rut. And to make it worse, her birthday's in February. Oh, that's two things in one month I have to think of, right? And I'm thinking, so she challenged me. She's like, January's rolling around about this time. She's like, be a little more creative. Come on, okay, honey. And then this arrived on my doorstep. Time magazine, Science and Romance. I was like, yes! Scientists are smart. I need help. This magazine will help me. Kid you not. You can go look it up in the archives, right? So I don't remember everything's in there, but I seem to recall, like, I looked up, I'm flipping through it, and they had a series of articles. One was, what's the deal with chocolate and women? Because in my house, I have a daughter, Hope, and my wife will get chocolate, and she'll hide it, and then my daughter will be like a bloodhound. Right? I mean, like, it's stapled to the roof, and my daughter will find it. Then my wife will go look for it 2 months later, and this primal howl will arise in our house. Who stole my chocolate? I look at my son and say, we better go for a drive. I think it's about to be a war, right? Do not mess with mama's chocolate. So this article says, well, it turns out, ladies, that you have a 42% higher dopamine hit from chocolate than the man does. It's an 80-20 thing, so not every, but it's an 80-20, 80% of women, right? And about 10-20% of guys, but like me, I'm like caramel, blueberry, I don't care. Chocolate, right? But that wasn't helping. So I turned to the next article, right? I'm looking at this one. The next article was about love. Is love real? Here we are, right? The scientists said no, there's no such thing as love. Right? Well, mama hugged me. No. Your mama got a dopamine hit, which is put in her by nature so that she nurtures you instead of killing you, because she wanted to a couple times. Right? Right? Mama says, I brought you in this world, I'll take you out. Right? Mama, how about a hug? Come on. Another dopamine hit so that the species can go on. This was the explanation. I kid you not. Right? That it was just about these chemical reactions which have allowed us to be a successful breeding and perpetuating species. That was depressing. So I turned the page. Then the last article was like, why we're attracted to certain kinds of people. I'm like, yeah, baby. Here we go. This is going to be good. We're going to find out why. So I looked at it, and it turns out, guys, when you look at a woman, apparently according to these scientists, gals when you look at a man, let me flip that around. Girls, when you look at a man, your primordial evolved traits, right, this is a little Jungian here, if you know Carl Jung, is looking for a man who can hunt down food to feed the babies, because that's we're evolved animals. Yes, look at me. You send me to the market, baby, I'm bringing that milk home. Mighty hunter, milk, right? And then guys, when you're looking at girls, right, your evolved brain apparently is looking for someone who can breed a lot. So, young ladies, if a guy looks at you and says you're cute, what he's really saying is, that heifer will bear. Well, that wasn't very helpful, so I did the sensible thing and I went out and got flowers and chocolate. Now we laugh, but seriously, you can read this stuff all day long. Maybe not quite as amusing when you actually read it. You see, I think we Christians have a better story, because if we look at this, you are not free, you cannot actually think, you cannot love, you don't matter, there's no such thing as human dignity, you're not responsible, and however you're born, you can never change. You are a prisoner of your genetics or your upbringing or whatever environmental thing we want to blame. And when you die, you have no hope. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with Nazis either, because it's what's right and wrong if there is no moral code coming from God. G.K. Chesterton, living in the time period when this stuff was really coming to the fore, led by people like Herbert Spencer and Sigmund Freud and so on. He said this, look, I never said a word against eminent men of science. What I complain of is a vague popular philosophy which supposes itself to be scientific when it's really nothing but a sort of new religion, and an uncommonly nasty one. That's why when you do apologetics, nobody actually wants to talk about science. Very few people have thought through all the way what they learned in their biology class about humans merely being evolved animals, I mean, frankly, people would still get offended, which is weird because they've, been raised, and we're talking like non-Christians, like you're just an animal. No, seriously, right? How dare you call me that? Did you take biology? You're merely, in fact, you're just an object. Right? And if we said it that bluntly, right, people get kind of upset. And so what most people want to believe today is actually something very different. They want to believe that I can be whatever I feel myself to be, whatever I will myself to be. Weirdly, the most popular godless worldview today has nothing to do with Darwin or evolution. I know, I grew up, we were primed to debate evolution, and we got out in the real world, nobody wanted to talk about it, nobody cared. Like outside the science building at San Diego State University where I was an undergrad, nobody cared. Because we were just like, whatever, dude. It's whatever you want. Right? If you want to be fancy, this is postmodernism. But this is the world we are now living in. A thing is true because I say so, because I feel it to be true, because I want it to be true. You hear this all the time. In fact, my classroom is literally next door to the Career Center. I love the people in the Career Center. It's where we dump kids that we don't know what else to do with. Here, go to the Career Center. Those ladies will love on you. But they've got all the slogans. You can be anything you want to be if you believe. Yeah, it's a Disney room, basically. Right? You will it, it will be so, right? And we got popular people like Deepak Chopra says, the most creative act you will ever take is the act of creating yourself. Since there's no meaning, says Jean-Paul Sartre, to be a little more snooty about it, right? I'm bringing a French philosopher, right? Man is what he wills himself to be, even if it's not a man. Right? I'd like to try that, though. But I'm a little afraid if I walk into the bank and I'd say, I'm Elon Musk and I'm here to make a big withdrawal, they'd laugh at me. If I said, but I'm willing myself to be Elon Musk. I feel like Elon Musk. I don't think they'd buy it. That's interesting, by the way, right? What was one of the things the snake said in the garden? Take a bite of this and you can be like God. What was God's first thing? He's the creator. Oh, isn't that interesting? The reality is, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And I think our society is beginning to run smack into allowing this nonsense to become, part of the DSM, the psychology manual, part of policy. It's just getting so weird that even non-believers say, now, wait a minute. I work in a public school. I'm the chair of the history department. We have 9 teachers. A couple are believers. But some of the policies that are coming to us from the state, it just cracks me up because the non-Christians walking around saying, do we really have to teach this nonsense? I'm like, oh, coming around, are we? Right? Reminds me of the poet Stephen Crane. A man said to the universe, sir, I exist. However, replied the universe, the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation. You see, if the universe is meaningless, that's why you can make your own meaning. Aren't you just a meaningless part of a meaningless universe shouting out that you are whatever you want to be and nobody's listening? It's absurd, literally. Christians, we have the better story. So, I want to spend the last 25 minutes talking about the better story. What if, may I propose to you, and something you can propose to your non-Christian friends, what if your identity is not determined by the truck you drive, by where you got your degree or whether you didn't get a degree at all, how much money is or isn't in your bank account, not determined by some traumatic incident or some awesome incident in your past, not by your behaviors or your sins or your temptations or your failures or your successes. None of that determines who you are. What if I am not a white, bald, middle-aged male any more than I am a blue sweater or brown shoe? Yes, those are true statements about parts of me. They're adjectives to describe bits and pieces of me, but it is not who I am. Let me say one other thing. What if you also don't get to decide who you are at all? That's not up to you. Now that challenges our society's individualistic desire for total autonomy. But nobody would say, I'm a divine being that can make my will happen. Not really. We all admit we are frail and human. I can say I'm a 6'5" NBA center all I want, but I don't think the Blazers are going to be ringing my phone off the hook. It doesn't make it true. The Bible addresses this. The prophet Isaiah said, woe to those who quarrel with their maker, those who are nothing but shards of pottery, bits of pottery among the pot shards on the ground. Does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? Does your work say the potter has no hands? See, Isaiah says, y'all running around saying you don't like what God has done. That's absurd. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And the fear of the Lord is simply this. I understand who I am in relationship to Almighty God. Right? And if I get that, then I should respect, be in awe of, admire, and be humble in the face of the Creator who made me what I am. So what did God make me to be? We find this in the beginning of the story, the Christian story, the better story in the book of Genesis. I will let you all pause and appreciate the brilliance of Calvin and Hobbes. If you know the verse, and you probably do, Genesis says that we are made in the image of God. And I want to take a deep dive with you into that idea here for the last part of this talk. Genesis 1:26-27 says, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, by the way, when I grade my students' essays, I get really frustrated with redundancy. And so you may be wondering why God keeps repeating himself. But remember, in ancient Hebrew Greek, there's no punctuation, there's no bold, there's no colored font, there's no printers, there's no underlining. So repetition is the way of saying, this is really important. It's like bold, underlying, yellow highlight for us. So this seems to be a big deal to God, right there at the beginning. I've still got 22 minutes. So I want to explore 5 things about that. Number 1, you were created with purpose and meaning. The very first thing we Christians can say is, if you're going to tell me there is no God, you do not have a logical reason, you don't have a leg to stand on to say that humans have any dignity, purpose, or meaning. Like, if you want to believe that, then you're going to have to admit that you're just a meaningless chunk of the meaningless universe. Our story says different. We believe that it was created by somebody with a purpose, which means I'm in this universe created with a purpose. And frankly, you're never going to know who you are until you know God. If you're the image of God, getting to know God is how to get to know you, like you're made in his image. So it seems to me, if you're made in the image of God, if that's true, then the more you know God, the more you will know about who you are. Right? My old dad from New England, I'd say, Dad, I just got to find myself. And he'd go, well, the problem with that, son, is wherever you go, there you are. What does that mean? Wisdom from Pops, right? But it's true. No matter what I do to try to create an identity for myself, right? I can make all the money in the world. I can win. I can lose. I can have surgeries. I can do whatever I want. But there's still that me in there. I can't run from myself. And all this stuff I'm doing out here doesn't change what's in here. So what did God make me to be here, at the very depth, center, soul of my being? And Augustine puts it this way. He says, you've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. If we could find meaning in our society by comfort or wealth or prosperity or options, we would be the most meaning-filled society in the history of humanity. Well, we are a society that has more therapists than any society in history of humanity. We have so many options, we don't know what to do with them. That's because no matter how many options you pick to try to find yourself, you still have that thing in you that is the you God created. If you're running from that, good luck. And all you got to do is walk through the supermarket and see all the people who've made it in the magazines. You're standing there by the bubble gum and the candy wrappers, and they're on their 5th rehab or their 9th marriage or their 12th prenup or whatever. Like if anybody should be happy, right? It should be Kanye or the athletes or whoever, right? And it's a train wreck. Right? They're loaded. They got everything. Why aren't they happy? That's what Augustine says. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. See, we have the better story. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and give you that overflowing, abundant, spilling over the dam. That's what that word means in Greek. To the fullest. Number 2. Why am I here? You're created to glorify God. Now that's a churchy word. One of the beautiful things about teaching public school, especially teaching European history, medieval history, and world history, is I get to explain Christianity a lot in a public school. Also at community college. The trick about that is I was raised in church, so I can speak churchese. I'm fluent. Hallelujah. Help him, Lord. Glorify, sanctify, incarnation. I can do it. And I'm saying in front of public school kids, and they're like, what language is he speaking? So I've had to figure out how do I explain Christian concepts in non-Christian language or non-churchese, right? So glorify God. That's a churchy word. And I've heard non-Christians say, well, does God have a self-esteem problem? He needs us just to say how awesome he is all the time. That sounds like a pretty weak God to me. It's like, oh, you don't know what that means. So let me break that down for you a little bit. See, the word image of God there, we translate image. In Hebrew and Greek, it's a little bit different. You'll kind of recognize the Greek word. It's icon. You are the icon of God. Now, the thing about an icon, right, is that it symbolizes a real thing, but it's not the real thing. If you open up your social media app and you made one of the little cartoon icons for yourself that kind of looks like you, I think I've only got like 1,000 cartoon faces, and we just picked the one closest to us, and we think it's unique to us, but yeah. Anyway, is that really you? No. That's your icon. It says, though, there is a real you. What's your name? So if I see Angela's social media, I see Angela's icon, I go, oh, there's Angela. No, I go, oh, there's Angela's social media, and that little face, that's not really Angela, but I know there's a real Angela. So when people look at you, they're supposed to go, there's a real God, isn't there? There's a real God, isn't there? There might be a creator out there. You are the icon of God. The Hebrew word, okay, brace yourselves theologically, because this might roll you a little bit, is selim. It means you are the idol of God. Now hang on, okay, don't start the bonfires yet. Let me explain that. Think about what people believe about idols. Do idol worshipers really believe that that rock is the God? No, they don't. Right? So if you go back to Greek times, and they have an idol of Zeus. If you ask a Greek, where's Zeus? He's on Olympus. Why do you pray to that stone thing? Well, it's just stone, but as soon as we blessed it, it was set apart for Zeus, and that is how we can pray to Zeus, who is over there in the sky in Mount Olympus, but we know that's not really Zeus. It's an object that reminds us of the real Zeus. So when they say in Hebrew, you are the selim of God, it's like, you are the thing that God put on earth so people would look at you and worship him. That's why he banned stone idols. He said, I've already made things to remind everybody of me. Don't make stone or wood ones. You are the living testimony and reminder that there is a creator. You are the image of God. You're to show God to the world. That's what you're meant to do. So, how many people on the planet right now are not doing that? How many are not doing that? You know, a lot. A lot's good enough, yeah. So if that was you're made to do and you're not doing it, then it's going to be hard to be happy if you're not doing the thing you were made to do. Right? Things were made to do something, right? This was made to be a computer. I could use it as a hammer, but would be a very unhappy laptop because that's not what it was made to do. So we can use this for lots of things. But if we're not using it for what to do, glorify God, it's not going to be happy. Now, why does God need us to glorify him? Well, let me go back to, and this is, again, tying into the Presbyterian church we're in. This goes back to the history of the English church and the Scottish church. The Westminster Catechism, very powerful statement of belief, says this: the chief purpose of man is to glorify God and What's the rest say? Oh, it's supposed to be fun? Yeah. It's supposed to enjoy this. A lot of times churches leave that last part out. Well, I'm just trying to glorify God. Well, if you're happy and you know it, tell your face, because you're supposed to enjoy him forever. Right? This is what you were made to do. Now, let me try to explain it this way. When you say glorify God, you picture saying, okay, yes, God's awesome, God's awesome, God's awesome. But did you know God says that about you? That he exalts you? Zephaniah 3:17, James 4:10, 1 Peter 5:6. It says that he will exalt us. What's that old song we used to sing? Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. I think the King Jimmy says, exalt you in due time or something. I can't remember. Right? Yeah. Right. So what's that like? Okay, well, let me put it this way. Again, I work in a high school, and it's always funny, too, because kids don't think we teachers are, like, awake. So they walk in the room, new boyfriend, new girlfriend, they don't think we know. Right? And they're all, right? And then the dude leaves, and the girl's there, her friends are, she's like, he saw this, and he saw this, right? And I'm like, okay. She's exalting the new boyfriend. Then the dude walks in and goes, yeah, man, she's so cool. He's talking to his friends, right? They're glorifying each other. They're lifting each other up. There's a mutuality there, right? So we're saying God is awesome, God is awesome. And God's up there, look at my kids, they're awesome, they're awesome. This is not God needing his self-esteem thing, right? Non-Christians get that wrong. This is a relational thing. This is you loving God and God loving you back. That's why it's enjoyable. You get to enjoy his presence in your life. You get to enjoy a relationship with him. And by the way, if it's a competition to exalt, we lose, right? Because you can exalt him until your ears fall off, and you still can't be how much God loves you back. This is not what it sounds like to non-Christians. It's not God needing his self-esteem, because God doesn't need anything. This is us loving God so that the world can see who he is. And God loves us back. That's what it means to be in a relationship with God and to glorify him. To be so in love with him you can't stop talking about it. Number 3. Note that Genesis said, male and female created he both in his image. And you can go throughout Scripture, this is a whole other lecture, on how much Christianity breaks down the tribalism and the classism and the hostility between people. Paul is hammering the church all throughout the New Testament. Hey, rich guy comes in, don't give him the best seat. Let him sit with everybody else. Paul is all the way through talking about breaking down all these paradigms he had, Jew and Gentile, slave and free, rich and poor, in this new thing called the church, where suddenly everybody's hanging out together like they're the same, like they all bear the image of God. The whole idea of equality. Side note, if you want to really nerd out on this, great book, gay, non-Christian British historian named, wait for this, Tom Holland, no, not the Spider-Man guy, has written a book called Dominion, in which he essentially says, I'm not a Christian, but everything I love about modern Western culture, I owe to Christianity. I love it when non-Christians testify. Yeah, it's like, dude, keep coming. You're getting closer. You know, you're on the right trail here. You should read it. Fascinating. Like equality, dignity of humans, all that. He says that doesn't exist anywhere. And when the Christians show up at the Roman Empire, the Romans don't have to do with it because this makes no sense to them. It's that radical. And so C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, there are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. We see this with Peter, right? Peter's raised in a very racist society. Jews don't talk to, touch, eat with Gentiles ever. If you do, and you are a Jewish male, you cannot enter the synagogue until you go through 24 hours of ritual cleansing. And you definitely don't eat that stuff in the Old Testament law. And so what does God do? God shows up to Peter and says, hey, there's some Gentiles over there. I want you to go eat with them and tell them about me. They already love me. They need some more information. You got to go. And Peter's like, whoa, hang on, God. I don't do that. Right? So God has to smack him around a little bit and drop a sheet down with lots of bacon in it. I'd have been into that, but I'm Irish. So, but eventually he figures out, right? So he goes to the house, and worst sermon beginning ever. He walks in and says, well, I shouldn't be here with you, scum, basically, loose translation. But I'm here anyway because God sent me. Like, Peter, read the room, man. Not a good sermon start. No. But eventually he gets to this statement where he says, I now realize, right? I love Peter. Peter gives me hope, right? Peter's born with foot and mouth disease. He gets putting his foot in his mouth. But he says, I finally get it that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. Right? Peter finally goes, this is a new thing. God's like, it's actually an old thing. Genesis 1. Everybody is made in the image of God. Number 4, you were made to be free. Now by free here, I mean moral agency. Sorry, you are responsible. You can't blame your upbringing or genetics. Now I get there are chemical issues, and I get that upbringing has a strong effect on us. I'm not simplistic. But at the end of the day, the Christian story looks you in the eye and says, stand up like a man, stand up like a woman, and accept your freedom and the responsibility that goes with it. It treats us like adults, not like dogs. Right? And there's a difference, right? You know, people know this. Deep down inside, they know this. Look, if I walk down the stairs in the morning in my bare feet, and I hit that bottom step and it goes squish and I smell poop, I'll look at the dog and say, bad dog. I don't mean dog who has violated God's moral law. What I really mean is dog who has made my life a little more inconvenient. I don't assign moral freedom and choice to the dog. Right? Now, if my 22-year-old son does it, we're having a very different conversation. Because I ascribe choice to him, right? And even a non-Christian would have to admit, yeah, okay. See, you do believe we have choice. You do see us different than the other animals, don't you? Right? Deep down inside, we know this. So we're made to be free. Now, the problem is, that's the problem. We abused our freedom. We sold our birthright. That's Genesis 3. So that means we're responsible, and we have rebelled against God. Okay, so there's the problem. Good news, you're free. Bad news, we blew it, and every one of us continues to blow it. That's the part of the better story. That's where the world tends to go. This is the part we don't like. And sometimes you say, well, take it like a man. Take it like a woman. Grow up. Right? Because you don't get to talk about social justice, but never be responsible for anything. Right? Because if nobody's responsible, there's no justice. If there is justice, then somebody's responsible. So which is it? You can't have it both ways. Christianity is all about justice in society because we believe there's a right and wrong and you're responsible. And when you blow it, something has to be done. So we exchange the image that we were for a lie. You know what's kind of crazy about that? Satan comes along and says, for God knows that when you eat from your eyes will open and you will be like God. Weren't we already the image of God? I kind of think this is like buying your own car from the thief who stole it. Like, Adam, Eve, you already were the image of God. What you wanted was to be God. That's dumb. Because Adam and Eve, I don't think you have, and no descendant of Adam and Eve has ever made something out of nothing, ex nihilo. So you're not God. But you were doing pretty good before, and Satan tricked you and all of us. I love what Chesterton said in response to a challenge, at least the story goes. There's some debate about whether this happened, but something he would have said. Allegedly, there was a newspaper contest. Write an essay on what's wrong with the world. And this was Chesterton's response, the story goes. Dear sirs, I am. Sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton. See, I'm what's wrong with the world. You're what's wrong with the world. We all abuse that freedom. And of course, the good news of the gospel is that's not where the story ended, thank God. Right? And Christ steps into that mess, and he sets out to restore the image of God. And look at the New Testament, all the image language that is in the New Testament. Colossians 1:15 says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Christ, who is the image of God. And then it starts talking about how we are being remade into the image of God. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. Okay, so if he bears the image of God, and I was meant to be the image of God, I'm being conformed to his image. Hey, I'm getting back to where I'm supposed to be. Once again, I can be what I was meant to be in the first place. That's the good news of the gospel. Once again, I can glorify God. I can be an image bearer. Colossians, and I put in the new self, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. 1 Corinthians, just as we've borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. So this image language is throughout the New Testament describing what is happening to those of us who are being regenerated, healed, renewed, restored by the gospel, by the good news in our life, becoming, once again, people who can do what we were meant to do from the beginning, bear the image of God. That's the Christian story. So you want to be an object? Do you want to scream meaningless things as a meaningless object in a meaningless universe? Okay. I think we have a better story. And it's rooted in this who you really are. Last thing. What that begins to look like is as we begin to realize how much God loves us, that love begins to overflow towards other people, even difficult people, even people that we think are kind of weird or who offend us or who anger us, who don't think like us. See, a lot of Christians are very defensive today and angry. Why? Did you expect the world to like you? Because Jesus says over and over again, it ain't going to be easy. But he does say, I have overcome the world. How are we supposed to respond to that? Jesus says over and again, love your enemies, love your neighbors, love the people around you. That's hard. And he doesn't just say love, he says go crazy with it. You realize when Jesus said go the extra mile, Roman law said that any Roman soldier could walk up to a Jew and say, carry my pack, but I'm only allowed to make you carry it for a mile because they didn't want to make the Jews too angry because it would be another rebellion. And at the end of the mile, the Jew could put it down and go his way, and a Roman would grab another Jew, hey, you, carry my pack. They used them as human mules. Jesus is looking at thousands of Jews, probably with some Roman soldiers on the hill watching, and says, go one more mile for those guys. Yeah, any preachers in here? Try that on your Sunday morning sermon. I'm an American. We don't do anything we don't want to do. Oh, sorry. I switched cultures, didn't I? Radical love, right? Crazy stuff. Hard stuff. How many of you have... Don't raise your hand. How many of you have somebody it's hard to love in your life? Don't raise your hand. Right? Jesus says, yeah, go an extra mile, right? That's hard. God, I don't know, right? Because God asks us Christians to do crazy, tough things. And he says, you are the image of God. That's how you show that. I want to finish with this. I ran across this passage a few years ago, and even though I was raised in church, you know how you hit a passage and you read it for a long time, and then one day it just strikes you totally new. Like, may the Holy Spirit just says, time for you to really get this, right? And I read 2 Corinthians 5, read the whole chapter, it's amazing, especially the last 2/3. It says, Christ's love compels us, right? Drives us, energizes us, forces us. That word compels is really powerful. It says, so now on we regard nobody from a worldly point of view. Since I'm with Worldview Academy, I love that part because, hey, look, worldview is in the Bible. Right? Seeing people differently, seeing people as images of God or people who are images of God, but they don't know they are and they need Jesus so they can be that. It says, all this from God who, and here's the crazy, crazy, crazy part, reconciled us to himself, right? We were enemies at war. Peace has been made through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. Now hang on a sec. I'll try not to go over here, but I might go a minute over. We are part of God reconciling the world to himself. Now I don't know about you, but I'm like, that's kind of too big for me. I mean, you want heroes, God. I'm more of a hobbit. Like, I'm more worried about second breakfast. I don't know if I can do this. Like, what are you thinking, right? It says, the Bible says the angels look on in amazement. I think they're like, I don't know what God's doing. But those guys, That's the plan? That's the army of reconciliation he's going to use to save the... Why didn't he use us? Like, we got swords and flames and wings. They're humans. They kind of messed it up in the first place. But I'm reminded of a story, and I'll finish with this story, because this is kind of, I think, how God sees us. That's my daughter, because it's my slideshow. I put my kids in it. And she was about that size. I was out stacking wood one day. Stacking wood. Manly thing. Oh, stacking wood. Chopped down tree. Southern Oregon. We burn things, okay? And here comes Hope, my daughter. Like, she's 3 or 4 years old. She waddles like that. And she walks up to Dad, and she looks at Dad, and she picks up twigs and starts putting on the wood pile. Oh, and I looked at her and I said, "You fool! There's not enough kinetic energy in those twigs to do us any good." No, I didn't say that. I did what you all did. I went, "Oh, honey, come look. Look at this work ethic. By the time she's 7, we can retire and she'll support us. She's amazing." That's what I did. I did what you did. And so sometimes when I read 2 Corinthians 5, I'm like, God, that's her now. God, I'm putting twigs on your wood pile here. I don't feel like I'm doing a whole lot here. I don't feel like I'm up to this thing. Loving is hard work. I'd rather run away from a lot of people that just bother me. You're going to have to help me. Probably I'm doing more damage to the kingdom. He goes, "No, keep moving that twig. I got the rest." He's up there looking down. "Gabriel, look at my kids. Come here, look." Gabriel's like, "I don't get it. I'm an angel." He's like, "No, I love those guys. That's my plan. Okay, I'm doing most of the lifting myself, but they're part of the plan." That's what you're called to do. That's our better story. And that's why we do apologetics. To show people what they truly were meant to be, instead of falling for these counterfeits and crazy ideas as they're desperately trying to fill that God-shaped hole in their heart. Thanks for listening. God bless you guys. I hope you have a great weekend here at this conference. And I'm speaking again tomorrow, so if I see you again, I'll be thankful you actually came twice. So God bless you.